Welcome to those who are watching via live stream. Action items. Betty Ann is not here yet. Okay.
Excuse me, if you like, Mr. Warden, we could start the discussion in terms of the 2017 budget.
Please.
If you like. We met this morning and prior to this morning's committee meeting, and the feedback at this morning's meeting was very, very helpful. And the one document that we've been really discussing it a lot at the senior management table as well, in terms of how to start to present it in a manner that gives the decision makers, the council, the tools, and so that you can make decisions quickly and have confidence that you're exercising the due diligence that you need to. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Betty Ann. No. Right now, Betty Ann, I was just going to start to go through the consolidated Bruce County corporate summary is the document that I thought it could be a starting point to then get to a place in terms of, through you, Mr. Warden, where yourself and council wish to see the rate increase, if there's any initiatives that are causing heartburn or that you would like us to reconsider or to tweak, and then the areas that you're pleased with that you would like us to protect if it gets to that point.
Good, thank you. She is turning it over to you. Yes.
Okay. I was just confirming you were turning it over to me. Thank you. So this is the document, of course, the consolidated summary for 2017, which you briefly saw last week and have had an opportunity, if you had time, to review it, and if everyone's comfortable with where we're at. So what I wanted to first take you through was the analysis sheet, which we had last year. But what it does is just summarize, of course, the submissions from 2016 to 2017, showing the 6.6% and the increase of the $2.7 million. And then what it does is highlight in particular what the impact of salaries is having. And so we can see that the increase in salaries and wages, and you can see by department, of that 2.7 million, there's 1.7 million dollars that's based that is generated from increases to salaries and benefits. And then further along, as you've heard from each of the directors, what the impact on the FTE. And so you have received information from each of the directors as they've made their presentation as to what's driving that change, the 2.83 across the organization. If we look at the dashboard itself, which was new for 2017, it gives us a highlight of what the capital versus our operating split, and then shows us the budget increases, in this case, by percentages only. And we know that certainly as revenue is generated and the use of reserves and or not the use of reserves can change, particularly in the capital areas. So again, it's a valuable tool, but we need to dig deeper into to find out what is actually bringing that message. And then by pressure category, because as you know, that was introduced to us as really a foundation of the document itself. And in the pressure categories, we still have certainly room for growth, and there's always room for interpretation when it comes to, is an adjustment to base? Is it just to maintain the current service that we have? Is it provincially legislated? Is there growth that's related to that? Is it a council initiative? Or is it a service initiative where the impact of delivering that service is going to actually result in savings or an improved program or service that we deliver? And then this just echoes what you saw in the first document, but again highlights those the red, green, and yellow for the overall increases. So I wanted to then, from that sheet, then go to the analysis for the total department.
He's
The
back
friendly
visiting.
fly. And to highlight the pressure categories in particular is what I wanted to do here. Excuse me. So again, we have, you can see, I think it's important to highlight what our council initiatives are in this case, and you'll recall the 150th anniversary of the celebrations next year. In corporate services, we have the Grey Bruce Regional Health Center, the SWIFT program, the Wingham Hospital, and the Bruce County Historical Society. So those are commitments that council has made. That's approximately 1% of the levy. Now, understandably, the Grey Bruce Regional Health Center was already included in our base budget in previous years. In social services, the council priority, this is the transfer to reserves, the capital reserves, the commitment that we have made to increase that. And in library, that's the recognition of the library service grants, known library rents. It has a couple of different names as it's evolved over the years, and that recommendation to increase that. There are a number of service initiatives, which, again, I would remind you of the...
Do we have a fly swatter?
It's just going to kill me.
Thing is, there's two in here now.
Wait for the right time, you can pull the channel.
So under the service initiatives, there are a number, obviously, that make up that, and I would either now or at your own leisure, I would encourage you to review the notes. The notes pages are a very a valuable piece that highlight what the where the costs are being driven from, or where the savings are. And then in the area of growth, in paramedic services, we had identified the stretcher program, and after further review, it may not be appropriate. That's in growth. It's probably more likely should be recognized under service initiatives, but it is shown in there. And then there's provincially legislated programs, particularly in the housing area, the funds, and those are revenues and expenditures that we receive in some cases. In others, they are the fire safety part of it, and looking at that legislation as to what the expectations are. And then, of course, maintained services is the bulk of where our adjustments are taking place in 2017. And a number of adjustments to base that we've seen throughout the year, and certainly capital plays a big part of that as well. And then when we look at expenditures by type, you can clearly see the $1.7 million that the salaries, wages, and benefits contribute to. And then the staff-related costs, we have the contract services, the reduction, and that's in part, I believe, the museum generated, there was a change in that, if I recall. And then, of course, the capital, the change in the capital. But once again, the capital in the methodology that we use at this point, because we take all the capital back to zero, but if there's projects that have been capital of nature and they have revenue coming from reserves or from other sources of funding, then that can skew this as well. But then we show our revenue by type, and showing the change in the federal, change in the provincial, which one of the probably two contributing factors with the provincial will be the paramedic services, and in social services, the change in the uploading of the savings.
Darn thing.
And once again, bringing it back to the 6.6 and showing the full-time equivalents of the 2.83% increase. If I wasn't on camera, I might do something different. Also wanted to
Missed 'em.
also, I think it was value of drawing to your attention the tax stabilization reserve, and you will recall that last month I provided, or earlier this month actually, provided a report to you regarding the use of the tax stabilization reserve that had been generated at the end of 2015, and we've been able to put it to very good use for a number of initiatives in 2016. We are on track to hopefully add to that tax stabilization reserve as a result of potential surplus at year end, but again, it is very premature to be actually putting any money into the bank as that, because we can certainly have lots of winter weather, but we are hopeful in some of the other areas where we're on track. But this being the non-departmental budget, we are showing that there is the transfer from the tax stabilization reserve. This budget is intending to use $200,000 to earmark for implementation of any results from the market study, and then there's $275,000 from the tax stabilization reserve, which will be used to offset the levy. The one thing that we have done, you will recall, in prior years, we have utilized funds from the WSIB reserve in recognition of being a Schedule II employer, and then that those savings would be used to offset the levy. Last year that was $475,000, but because we have realigned the services within Human Resources and the Health and Safety Program to better identify the resources that are actually put into that program, there has been a greater reliance on the WSIB reserve from the Human Resources division, the health and safety. So given that, we wanted to reduce the impact that the levy would then have on it. So you will recall that the health and safety program had typically utilized about $250,000 of the WSIB reserve, and I believe for 2017, and because the realignment was done in 2016, that's over $400,000 that's being used. So we didn't want to continue to put pressure on that WSIB reserve from the non-departmental, so we would have reduced the request for the WSIB reserve to align with that. So there will be a need. In the present budget, we are drawing $475,000 from the tax stabilization reserve. That is to keep it at the 6.6%, yes. So earlier today, and since we had met last week in communication and conversation with our CAO, and each year because it is still in its infancy, the program itself, we are learning, maybe better tactics, better methodology to be able to deliver the tools that will help you. In hindsight, we're thinking perhaps you might have preferred to see this document first and then drill down to see how it develops. We thought seeing them all and then rolling it up was at that time thought to be the better solution. We would like to take some time now to get your feedback and anything that's particularly maybe gnawing or that you've identified, and then we do have a senior management team meeting next Tuesday where I've developed an internal report for our CAO that myself, the Deputy Treasurer, and the analysts have identified areas that could have some further consideration, and I'm not suggesting that all of those are just reductions as well, because there are probably areas in the budget where our directors have established budgets that will be difficult to even meet, given some of the what we're seeing in 2016, the level of spending, and to suggest that they may be able to have cuts that are in this current budget but how they would manage with those. So I can turn it back over to our CIO, and we're certainly looking for feedback. And
Excuse me, so through you, Mr. Warden, as the Director of Corporate Services has articulated, we have not met yet as a senior management team, but the schedule is for Tuesday, at which point it's important that everyone hear the message from all of you in terms of what your wishes are, and then we'll go back to the table as we do normally and review, and then come back with recommendations back to this body.
Okay, so I think what we can do is just we'll go right around the table and everybody can have their 2 cents and we will go from there. So Janice, would you like to start?
Well, overall, thanks. I'm not comfortable with the 6.6% increase. I wouldn't expect anybody to be. I always feel more comfortable around the 2% mark. I'm interested in knowing how everybody else feels. I seem to think we can do a pretty darn good job with the 2% increase. How do you feel, Mr. Paul?
Oh, I agree 100% with you, Janice, like I always do.
Oh, eh?
That, Betty Ann, the 425, 475, what you took from the tax reserve account, that's already factored in to bring the proposed consolidated budget to 6.6. How much is required to buy the percent? In other words, how much is the percent? You know, I'm not asking the question very well, I understand that, but if that 400 went back in other words, what would the increase be, like 9%, 8%?
1% is $420,000.
So that's, okay, 1% is 420, so we got a fair bit of money to find, fair bit of savings so far, as I'm not at all comfortable with the 6, but certainly willing to see what you say the staff hasn't met, and Betty Ann, you're saying you've got some suggestions, so I'd like to see that document, rather than tell you what to shut down, what not to shut down. Better wait to hear what you have to say.
In around that 3%. What's the balance in our tax stabilization fund right now? I'm sorry.
The balance is, from the report last month, just over $300,000. So this recommendation, this budget is built on
Savings.
on that there would be a surplus at the end of 2016 that could be applied, and that there would be no further initiatives in 2016 financed from the tax stabilization reserve.
So do you have some idea what you're predicting for surplus, or just
well,
roughly?
Well, we know that we would certainly, I guess I wouldn't, I'm building,
you just can't
I'm
say.
building the 2017 budget based on that. I have fairly high confidence that we would have at least that amount of money to be able to put into the tax stabilization reserve to manage the $475,000. I think we know that winter control can go south on us. There's certainly savings in a few of the departments. Some of them are salary related that we are monitoring very closely. Others, provincial offenses revenue is reasonably close to budget, but the third quarter information we haven't received, and that includes July and August, so that can be significant. And supplementals and write-offs, that information we don't receive from our lower tier municipalities until often into the
So is
the
it
new
winter
year.
maintenance you're counting on for?
I'm sorry?
Is it winter control you're counting on?
Winter maintenance will be a large part of it because we had a significant savings in the first half of the year.
Yeah, about 3%.
And the one thing we haven't factored in is, we of course don't have any assessment data, but we can typically assume that there would be a 1% growth is where we've hovered, just slightly under the 1%. But I think with a number of our initiatives in Bruce County, we anticipate that to grow. So, but at this point, we don't have any data on that.
So I'm just catching up with that big nuclear emergency management last week. I was so sorry to miss the meeting, but it didn't end until 4. The 1% growth, so I missed this, I just need to ask the question. The 1% growth, have you already built into the current figures?
No, it's not.
Okay, so that's to come. And so that's could be in the 5% range then, once that's down. As far as nailing a percentage, of course, I'm like everybody else. If you can get in the 3-4% range, that's wonderful. But I like to know first what you have to cut out. So with the growth, we're still almost at 6%, right? Even if you assume 1%, if it's a little bit more, we could be at 5. And so I'm thinking I'd like to see, first of all, ideally, I wouldn't like to see as much above 4, but I'd like to know what has to go. 3 is always better, but I could maybe live with 4.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I'm not much different than the last two. I think in 3 to 4% range, and I think I know there's a lot, and then I agree with Lan. I'd like to see where we're going to make those savings, but I think, you know, if we look at the same time, if you look at the consumer price index and what that is, and this is still well above it, 3%, and it's just hard to go back to that same group all the time and say that this year we want some more. And I know it's going to be hard, but it's going to be hard at the lower tiers too. So I'm like Mill, I'm around 3%.
Obviously, we can't accept this, or even 1 or 2% less. I'm thinking 3 to 3.5 in that neighborhood. A little flexibility over 3, if we know what's going to happen.
So it's nice being the last person to comment, but everybody does expect a bit of an increase. Everything is going up. So I do believe the public would be in favor of an increase, and I do support somewhere 3 point something is what I'd be comfortable with.
So a couple questions. Do we know what the education tax is this year? Is it going down or is it staying the same?
I haven't heard any suggestions that it's being altered this year, but I can see if I can follow up on that.
So then the next report we have about the increase in funding there, I know we haven't had that discussion. Has that been built into this budget? It has? Okay.
Yes.
I don't have a problem using the tax stabilization from last year, because that's taxes that we had already raised, so I think that should go back and offset for the people that have already paid it. So, and yeah, the 1% increase. One thing we didn't discuss today was the safety village. I know I thought about it, and I don't think we can help support a position there at the safety village, because that is something that would also have to be discussed before moving forward too. So, I guess that's a question I'm asking people today. Is that something that you're willing to support, is that position at the safety village?
What about the Saugeen Valley's request?
That one, the safety village.
Is it in this?
No.
It is
So
not.
there's still a few requests that are not built into this budget.
The 33,000 from Saugeen Valley has not been included in this budget, and that's the only one that I'm aware of that has not been dealt with and not included. If there are others, the Safety Village, yeah, it is not included.
They contributed $5,000 just to have naming rights for a sign in the street. But I don't know where they stand right now with regards to funding this. I don't think there's a big appetite, but I can't speak for Grey County. Ann?
Before we discuss those, can we have staff's, I'd like to see if we can have staff's suggestions first, and what else, like I'm coming back to that, I'd like to know what else we have to think of cutting out of the budget first, before we talk about adding anything more on, dealing with those other issues.
Mike, then Milt?
I just want some clarification, Betty, and you talked about the request from Saugeen Valley, and there is some money in the budget for that? The crop, was that crop cover program that?
Oh, the crop cover program. Chris? No, nothing? No. There's two different programs we're talking about. So the Saugeen Valley program will be the crop that's under planning and development, and there's zero included. And the Safety Village project is the 33,000, and there is zero for that as well.
Okay, thanks, Betty.
Robert?
On that crop protection, did they give us any idea, I kind of forget how much money that was going to cost the county?
I think it was a $60,000 contribution was my recollection, and that would be capital towards they would administer the cost of the program, that'd be capital towards the farm improvement.
Through you, Mr. Warden, when they had presented, they had articulated what they received from Huron, and Huron was 60,000, and they based it on a per acre rate. So if we had followed the same per acre rate, then it would be 60,000.
Milt?
Betty Ann, just to clarify, so WSIB reserve, 250?
Can just, if you just bear with me, I can bring up the human resources. I believe that it would be 250 from the non-departmental. We're planning on using 250, but then the human resources budget is utilizing it's over 400,000. So.
From?
The WSIB reserve. So I just want to.
So a total of 650,000 from WSIB?
Just let me confirm.
Through you, Mr. Warden, the 250 that the director's commenting on is replenishing the reserve. So the drawdown from HR is around 450, and the second piece is the replenishment of that 450 for the I think it's 275.
275, I think.
So, and last year WSIB reserve was in for how much?
475,000 non-departmental, and then HR, I believe it was, just don't want to give out numbers that aren't correct.
And that reserve just roughly is, I forget where that reserve is, it's quite substantial.
It was at about, I think, 1.8 or 9.
Yeah, okay.
And it's probably, we can make a note to bring an analysis back in on that reserve as well.
And so
That reserve is going to come back to bite us in a few years.
Eh?
That will come back to bite us in a few years unless we start replenishing it.
And, yeah, and then, so we have 475 from tax stabilization, and about 450 from WSIB reserve that we're withdrawing to offset this budget here. But we are contributing 250 back in to replenish the WSIB.
Through you, Mr. Warden, the funding from the tax stabilization is, a significant portion of that is going back into the WSIB reserve. So it's taking it from tax stabilization to replenish the WSIB.
To replace it in 2017, where we drew it from the WSIB reserve in 2016, and in 2017 we'll draw it from the tax stabilization because the HR budget is going to be utilizing $425,000 in 2017.
Yeah, but those two reserves, though, we are taking about close to 900,000 out of those two reserves, but we're replenishing back 250. So a net of about 650. We're okay.
Through you, Mr. Warden, one thing that we'll commit to is providing at the next meeting when we bring back the recommendations, we'll also bring back the listing for the reserves so that you can see what the movement has been and you'll have that visibility.
Christine, just refresh my memory. I remember I had asked about going out to see if we could get cheaper rates with the mortgage rates. Have we done that yet? I just can't recall.
Go ahead. So as they mature, we are getting much better rates. We haven't done a bulk process to look at ones that are outstanding, depending on the maturity date, what the impact would be. So that's something that we could look at working with finance with. Unless, Betty Ann, you have further to add. I'm not sure if your staff have done something from your end.
Just further to the conversations that two of our team members had worked on, and some of it is that our hands are tied, so we can't open them, but we have a staff member, as does Christine, that are still reviewing that, and it's on our to-do list.
It's the same with the long-term care facilities as well, because there's some of those mortgages that are 6%, is that not correct? Now, is there any, there's no way out of those even with a prepayment interest penalty, or there's just no?
They were long-term debentures, and at the time, a very good rate.
Yes, I know. I was here, or just after. Janice?
Well, I was just going to say, we would probably hit our target if we push the West Road back.
Right on. Let's do it.
I had to say it.
Yes, I'd have to respond. I'd agonize over that.
I think we all have, actually.
Just,
Milt?
what did we increase our contribution to reserve, Christine, for the social housing units? What was that increase?
So the increase for this year is about 113,000.
113, yeah. Which brought it to?
That takes us to just over 2 million. I think it's 2,017,000,
Right.
something around there.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Warden, the one piece that will be discussed with the senior management team is the desire to protect capital to the best of our ability. I would really hope that we're probably talking about 1.4 million reduction that we'll have to find. And it would only be under really extreme circumstances that we would be recommending to reduce the capital contribution, because the concern is that will really harm the county in the long run in terms of future initiatives.
So getting back to, or not getting back to, but to staffing and the FTEs that are proposed, and I know we've seen the presentations, is that something that has to happen? I have to ask the question.
So, Mr. Warden, I'll answer as the CAO. We have flexibility, but with that flexibility, we have to be sensitive that there are strains. So part of the discussion with the senior management team will be when we have the positions you speak of, can they be delayed? Yes, is the quick answer. The second piece is whether or not council would be willing to entertain an absolute hiring freeze, that there is with any retirements or attrition, that the positions are not backfilled. Excuse me, that's always, again, the worst possible scenario from an operational perspective, because there are some positions that we just can't function without. But those positions where we can function without them and the individuals are choosing to retire, I would certainly be recommending to council that those roles not be backfilled.
I mean, you look what just happened at Ottawa City Hall, 177 people have been laid off. But we also are in the service industry that we're here for our people, much like the city of Ottawa, but the budget constraints, and because let's face it, the wages is driving and I mean, with all the different programs we have in place, from Avanti to Point Click to all these different programs that should be saving us money and time, and just my opinion, but I think there is ways of, because it was said here earlier today about the cost of living, and there are people just hanging on in our communities that they're just not getting it, and to keep putting that unfair burden onto them, I mean, that's difficult. So if there's, Paul?
On the, Betty Ann, on the paramedic services, there was a variance of 677,000, 13.9%. And I'm pretty sure it's because of the stretchers, and that was a large part of that. But anyways, was that 677, like, would there be 50% provincial dollars for that, or it's not figured in there, or?
That is one of the areas that we have highlighted, that we are always a year catching up with the paramedic services with the provincial subsidy because of the unknown. 50%, that commitment hasn't been 100% certainly since 2000, and there were many years where we were far below 50%, and they base it on budget. And they base it on our capital by amortization as opposed to the actual capital cost. So there's a few little quirks in the way that they do their calculation, but that is one of the areas where we wanted to look at. The other part in paramedic services, you will recall that there's about $125,000 that we've actually allocated salaries and wages and also legal expense out of the Human Resources Department budget to paramedic services for that particular reason, because we identified that it is a cost, but right now it's being 100% borne by the county when it should be 50%. So we have did a transfer of expenditures over to paramedic services. So that's why both paramedic services and AHR budget will be slightly skewed because of that reallocation.
Ann?
So you mentioned this morning something like we are subsidizing it's basically a provincial program on the OEY CFCs, or the Ontario. And so is it normal that we have to subsidize by a certain amount anyway, or do we have to sometimes now start saying to the province, it's great for you to come out with these programs, but you know, this is, I think it's 2016, it was subsidized by $300,000. That was the figure I had here. You can correct me. But is that, you know, that starts to add on as well. So, you know, is that an area that we have to really look at and be firm on, and or maybe do we not have any choice?
Through you, Mr. Warden, I'm going to ask Christine to speak first, and then I'll follow up after she's answered the question about the exact dollar amount.
Or do you want to wait till the report? You said you were giving a report in November, that's fine too. But I just thought there's maybe potential savings, but
Yeah. But perhaps an indirect answer to the question. I'll refer committee members to the total sheet, if we could, Betty Ann, that you have put together. And when you go down and you look at the revenues, the provincial revenues are going up by 0.67 of 1%. And to the comment about COLA, that's another example where we're continuing to have pressure to deliver programs that are provincially mandated, supposed to be provincially funded, but in order to fulfill the mandate of the program, we're having to locally subsidize them.
So it was just like our presentation to the education minister, essentially.
Christine?
Sure. So to clarify, the draw on the levy for the Ontario Early Years program for the 2017 budget is just shy of 200,000. And then we are using around 80,000 in reserves. So there were Best Start reserves, and so we're funding the other up to almost 300,000 from reserves, knowing, as the CAO had mentioned earlier today, that by 2018 we might have some tough decisions to be made. We'll receive the funding announcement early in 2017, which we'll have to implement for 2018. The funding allocation letter that we received for the one-time funding for 2017 is $87,000. It has parameters attached to it that it's used for the planning of the transformation. And so we're needing to do some analysis to see what contribution is already in our 2017 submission that could actually use those dollars against it. So I suspect we will find some savings against the levy in the 2017 budget.
Through you, Mr. Warden, the other part that we'll be also talking about at the senior management table on Tuesday is 2017 is effectively the last year of the upload. And right now, the social services side of the house has been getting a benefit of approaching 150,000 a year. Some years a little more, some years a little less. So we, as the senior management table, need to start to talk about that so that next year at this time, we're not talking about how are we going to deal with that loss of income, because it will disappear.
And this question's for Charlie. The CMI this year, and I know Kelly and I have had this discussion, but do you see an impact next year? Or sorry, not next year, but 2018?
I see a positive impact, just basically because of what I see on the in the home level itself. Our home level of CMI is increasing, and it's our RIE documentation and our assessments that drive the CMI funding provincially. So I'm thinking that in 2018 we'll be in a better space than we certainly are projected for in 2017. Now, the other thing I just want to mention about the CMI 2017 projection, we are really hoping for the 2% increase overall in per diem as we did in 2016. If that doesn't happen, we're out to the tune of, oh my goodness, about $100,000. It's a big hopeful, that's all I'll say.
Okay, any other discussions, comments? So I'm hearing 3%, sorry, go ahead, Ann.
Mine's maybe off topic, but I sat in on that AMO presentation for our need, like our growing infrastructure gap, a problem which has been going on for a while, and looking at other ways of funding. So I'm thinking maybe at the county level, we need to, I expect the resolution will come to the county, or maybe I missed it last week, supporting AMO on looking at some other method of funding in Ontario, because we have the social services as well, which in other provinces, I understand is, that's not part of the property tax base. So so I think maybe as county council too, we need to really up our lobbying and support of AMO for finding, there's other suggestions other than property tax, because it's just, ever since I've been on local council, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So, and each budget gets tougher and tougher, and there's services, you hate cutting them more, but the reality, you have to balance it with what's the property tax can bear. So I don't know whether staff has received anything from AMO on the resolution, and they're hoping to have recommendations ready for 2018 or the 2018 provincial election. So that's just something I think we really need to look at and consider and start to lobby for changes.
Okay, so anything else? Any other, Milt?
You know the study we're doing to look at our
Pay equity?
equity, whatever. There's some money built in for that.
And that's the $200,000, but the recommendation is it be financed from the tax stabilization reserve. So you're marking that source. Yes.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing around the table is 3% is palatable for committee, council, that if you can take that back, Kelly, to the senior management team, and happy cutting.
Through you, Mr. Warden, we will bring a listing forward that will show what is being considered for, or being recommended, I should say, for removal, and what will remain within the budget with it.
Okay, we just had one information item. There is a staff recommendation. I'll let Betty Ann just maybe elaborate on that.
Certainly. It is a good news. So it is the funded, the formula-based component of the agreement with the OCIF, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. And the reason for it being brought here today is that they do require a bylaw in order for us to acknowledge this funding. And this recommendation is that that we accept it and that the bylaw be introduced, and that would be at our November session.
Staff recommendation, Milt, seconded by Ann. Any further discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor, opposed if any, that is carried. Motion to adjourn. David, Robert, all those in favor? Thank you.